You've been around people all day. Conversations, meetings, interactions, performing the version of yourself that functions in the world. And you're fine. You're present, you're engaged. Then you get home, close the door, and suddenly, out of nowhere, thoughts start surfacing. Thoughts you didn't know you were having. Feelings you didn't realize you were carrying. Questions you've been avoiding. They come flooding in the moment you're alone, like they've been waiting patiently for everyone else to leave. And you realize these thoughts have been there all along. You've just been too distracted, too occupied, too surrounded by other people's presence to hear them. Some thoughts only speak in silence. And now that you're finally alone, they're demanding to be heard. Some people avoid being alone specifically to silence these thoughts, surrounding themselves with noise and company to avoid what emerges in solitude. But others, they've learned that these thoughts aren't intrusions. They're insights. They've figured out that what surfaces in solitude is often what you most need to hear. So here's what I want to understand. Why do certain thoughts only appear when you're alone, and what are they trying to tell you? This is the psychology of solitary thinking, and understanding it might change how you relate to being by yourself. To understand why some thoughts only appear in solitude, we need to understand how your brain processes information. When you're around other people, your brain is in social mode. You're reading facial expressions, monitoring tone, managing your presentation, responding to external stimuli. A significant portion of your cognitive resources is dedicated to social processing. This is automatic and necessary, but it also means your brain has less bandwidth for deeper internal processing. The thoughts that require reflection, that need space to develop, they get pushed to the background. Think about it like running multiple programs on a computer. When social programs are active, they take up most of your processing power. The deeper programs, the ones that need to run complex analyses, they have to wait. And they do wait. They queue up in the background, processing slowly, building gradually. Then you're finally alone. You close the social programs, and suddenly all that processing power becomes available. The deeper thoughts that have been developing in the background can finally surface. They're not new. They've been forming all along. You just couldn't access them until now. Psychologists call this default mode network activation. It's a network in your brain that becomes active when you're not focused on external tasks. When you're alone, when you're not engaged with others, this network activates, and it does something crucial. It reflects. It processes experiences. It makes connections between past and present. It asks big questions about identity, meaning, relationships, life direction. This network is where your deepest thinking happens, but it only activates when you're not occupied with external demands. Here's where things get uncomfortable. Sometimes the thoughts that appear when you're alone aren't pleasant. They're doubts about your life choices, questions about whether you're happy, recognition that something needs to change, feelings you've been avoiding. These thoughts don't appear when you're around others because you're distracted, performing, maintaining. But alone, with no performance required, no distraction available, they emerge. And they're often uncomfortable because they're true. This connects to what psychologists call experiential avoidance. Many people structure their lives to minimize time alone, specifically to avoid these thoughts. They surround themselves with people. They keep the TV on constantly. They never sit in silence. They're terrified of what might surface if they stopped moving, stopped talking, stopped distracting. Because somewhere deep down, they know there are thoughts waiting. And those thoughts might require them to acknowledge things they don't want to acknowledge. Now you might be thinking, aren't these just anxious thoughts? Shouldn't I ignore them? And here's the distinction. Anxious rumination is repetitive, unproductive cycling. The same worry loops without resolution. But the thoughts that appear in genuine solitude are often different. They're reflective. They're asking real questions. They're pointing to genuine concerns. The person who appears in your thoughts when you're alone. Here's my observation. Modern life is structured to prevent solitude. We're constantly connected, constantly available, constantly stimulated. True aloneness, the kind where you're just sitting with yourself with no input, no distraction, no company, is increasingly rare. And when it does happen, people often can't tolerate it. They immediately grab their phone, turn on something, text someone, anything to avoid being truly alone with their thoughts. Social media in particular has colonized our alone time. You're physically alone, but you're never truly alone because you're consuming other people's content, other people's thoughts, other people's lives. The thoughts that need solitude to develop never get the space they need because you've filled that space with external noise. You're avoiding yourself while technically being by yourself. But let's talk about people who've learned to value the thoughts that appear in solitude, who've made space for genuine alone time and learned to listen to what surfaces. They haven't become hermits or antisocial. They've just recognized that some of their most important thinking happens when nobody else is around. The first step is creating actual solitude, not just being physically alone, but being genuinely alone. No phone, no TV, no podcast, no input, just you and your thoughts. This is uncomfortable at first. Your mind will race. You'll feel restless. You'll want to fill the space. But if you sit with it, if you tolerate the discomfort, deeper thoughts start to emerge. One powerful practice is what I call solitude appointments. You schedule time to be alone with your thoughts deliberately, not to solve problems or make plans, just to sit and see what surfaces. Maybe it's a walk without headphones. Maybe it's sitting with coffee and doing nothing else. Maybe it's journaling without an agenda. You're creating space for the thoughts that only appear in silence. There's also power in trusting these thoughts instead of dismissing them. When something surfaces in solitude, instead of immediately pushing it away or distracting yourself, you sit with it. You ask, why is this coming up? What does this mean? What am I avoiding looking at? These thoughts are often pointing to something important, something that needs attention, something you can only see when the noise stops. Breaking free from avoiding solitude requires understanding that loneliness and aloneness are different. Loneliness is painful disconnection. Aloneness is necessary solitude. You can be surrounded by people and feel lonely. You can be completely alone and feel content. The thoughts that appear in solitude aren't making you lonely. They're connecting you with yourself. In a world that treats constant connection as normal and solitude as something to fix, learning to value time alone is revolutionary. It's refusing to avoid yourself. It's choosing to hear what your deeper mind wants to say. It's recognizing that some of your most important insights will never appear in social contexts. They need silence. They need space. They need you to be alone. So if you avoid being alone because of what might surface, if you fill every quiet moment with noise and distraction, if you're uncomfortable with your own thoughts, if you can't remember the last time you sat in genuine silence, know this. The thoughts that appear when you're alone aren't problems. They're often the truest things you think. The feelings that surface in solitude aren't intrusions. They're often what you actually feel beneath the performance. And the questions that emerge when nobody's watching? Those might be the ones most worth answering. You just have to be willing to be alone long enough to hear them.